Welcome to the Rustic Garden Homestead. Today I'm going to show you all my DIY soil recipes. We're going to talk about indoor seed starting mix, outdoor seed starting mix, just this basic potting up mix, container mix, all the different recipes that I make myself. It's going to save you a lot of money. In the video description, I will put in a video that talks about all these different bag products that you can buy. And they're basically three categories: topsoil, garden soil, and potting up mix or container mix. That video is time-stamped. You can kind of jump through there and just learn what's in these bags and learn that you're really actually paying too much money. So the next step is to use sometimes these products and to make your own. You can save, again, so much money by just making it yourself. The really star of the show is peat moss. If you want, you can go ahead and use coco coir as a replacement or a combination of both. We're going to use some garden lime. That's to balance out the acidity in the peat moss. Even though I don't use it a whole lot, I feel like the range is okay. Some people want to add some lime to their mixes when they're using peat moss. We're also going to be using vermiculite. That is a very fine grain vermiculite, and this is what I use for my seed starting mix. And I actually buy this at Uline, U-L-I-N-E. You have to kind of spend a lot of money up front because you're buying 4 cubic feet worth of the product and you have to pay for shipping. But it goes a long way, and it's really much cheaper to buy components this way and blend them together. And to be honest with you, seed starting mix is basically vermiculite, peat moss, and maybe some perlite. And then you can also buy some perlite, which I find you don't really need. It's kind of like eye candy, but we're going to use it because I want to replicate some of the bag products that you buy, particularly the Miracle-Gro potting mix over there. So let's get started. This is going to be time stamped too, so you can kind of just jump to the parts that you want to watch. This is my basic growing medium. This is 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 earth, anything from your ground, from your garden. You can use topsoil if you have to buy bag soil as the earth, and then 1/3 peat moss. And just look how beautiful it is. I mean, I make this myself. I add in my own compost. I'm going to show you how to use different products that you can buy, again, to save some money. Now, I'm going to show you how to make this, but I just wanted to show you because I'm using it now over here, you know, potting up all kinds of different things. The addition of a little bit of perlite is what you see all the time when you buy bag products. And it doesn't really do much for the soil, for aeration or anything like that. You know, in theory it should, but you've got plenty of stuff in there. So this is very often what you're buying when you buy the bag products, and you're paying 3-4 times more versus making it yourself. So I use it. Let's get to the basic setup for my 50-50 mix and my 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 mix for pretty much your everyday gardening needs. And actually I want to start with the seed starting mix. So we're going to start with the indoor seed starting mix. My recipe for an indoor seed starting mix is 3 parts peat moss, 1 part very fine vermiculite. A part is just an equal measure. So for the sake of the video, I'm just using a small container like this. So it's 3 of these filled up with peat moss and then 1 of vermiculite. This is the base that I use for my indoor seed starting mix. It's going to save you a lot of money. When you're buying 12 quarts of the seed starting mixes, it can cost you anywhere from $7 to $12 to $14. You can make this for, like, seriously, like $3 for 12 quarts. If you want, I just take some garden lime and sprinkle it across the top. So it really, you don't need a ton of it, you know. Obviously here I'm just using a pinch. If you have more, a little bit more heavily handed, but you're just mixing in some lime in there, that will help neutralize the acidity. In my seed starting mix, I don't really do this too often because I found seeds tend to germinate a little bit better when the pH is a little bit lower, which means the soil is a little bit more acidic. So you just take this and you mix it all together. Now this is dry. We're going to add water to it. But this is going to resemble the seed starting mix that you buy. And it looks something just like this. The vermiculite, the peat moss, a little bit of lime in there if you want to add that in there. This is really, really good stuff. Completely dry. So we're going to add water. Now, here's the thing. When I make an indoor seed starting mix, I want my soil to be sterile. I don't want microbes. I don't want good microbes, definitely don't want bad microbes. When you take soil from the outdoors and you bring it inside, it's usually filled with fungus and eggs and stuff like that. Out in nature, stuff balances each other out. Indoors, if you have an outbreak of fungus gnats, it's going to devastate your seed starts. So I actually hydrate this in a can, you know, up in my office where I grow my plants, with boiling water. It kills everything in there, kills the fungus gnat eggs. I never have a problem. I worry about microbes and all that great stuff once the plants are out into the garden. Growing indoors, you don't need to worry about that for when you're just growing transplants. If you want, when you're done, after you do the boiling water, everything's sterile, you could add in some worm castings or compost you feel is not going to introduce any kind of problems indoors. I recommend not doing that and just using a water-soluble fertilizer to feed your indoor seed starts. And this is a perfect medium. So let me wet this down. This is the seed starting mix that I made. There's more vermiculite in there. If you want, you could add in more peat moss. You could do 2 parts peat moss, 3 parts vermiculite. This is a store-bought seed starting mix. Very light, looks good. A little bit of perlite in there, a little bit of vermiculite, mostly peat based. It's dark because it's mostly peat moss. If we wanted to really make it look more like that, we're going to add in another measure of peat moss. Let me show you what that looks like, because you don't have to follow my recipes exactly. You can kind of add and subtract peat moss and different ingredients until you get it to look like what you're trying to copy from, you know, a bag product. So what I'm using here really for building all the different bag products, so to speak, is Canadian sphagnum peat moss. 3 cubic feet compressed. When you open it up, fluff it up, you get about 6 cubic feet. When you add water, it probably more than triples in size, in volume. So you end up with a whole lot. Coming up here, this is the peat product that I just showed you, moistened, nice and dark. Looks very similar to the bagged product that you buy for your indoor seed starting mix. The ratio here is 1 part vermiculite. I added 3 more parts of peat moss, so it was a 1:6 ratio. And I think it looks great. You can pick anything in between here. Like I typically do 1 part vermiculite, 3 parts peat, but you can go up to 1 part vermiculite, 6 part peat. It just depends on what you like. There's no exact recipe, but this is beautiful for starting seeds indoors. I use it all the time. Buying the bag products, it makes sense, it's convenient, but you're really paying 3-4 times the amount than if you were to make it yourself. And this is what I use for my indoor mix. Outdoor mix, let's just blend this together, pretend it's what I made, because I don't want to keep having to empty this. So this is a ratio of your indoor seed starting mix, 1:3, 1:6. For outdoors, what I add to that is just some good old compost. So for my outdoor seed starting mix, and let's just say this is the ratio of 1 part vermiculite, 3 parts peat, I add 1 part compost. I just add that into there. So it's a 1:1:3 ratio. Peat, vermiculite, compost. And then I just mix it through. I'm not worried about sterilizing this. I just hydrate it with water. We're already outside, insects are all around. This is just a great seed starting mix for the outdoors. The compost will slowly feed. Now remember, I use water-soluble fertilizers inside to feed my seed starts, and I'm going to use water-soluble fertilizer outside also. But mixed in here is compost, something that's already broken down that the plants can use. I don't really add in organic granular fertilizer anymore. I have videos where I used to do that, but that takes time to break down, and these are just going to grow as seed starts, and then they're going to get potted up. The main difference between the next recipe that I'm going to show you is I don't use vermiculite in it. I only use that for seed starting. You don't really need this for containers, potting up mixes, or anything like that. You can add it. I mean, this is really nice stuff. However, it's just an extra expense. Now, if you want to make this look really premium, again, we're going to slide over here, grab some perlite, and you would just mix the perlite in, and you get the idea. You know, this is as premium as you're going to find anywhere. And you can use this for a great seed starting mix. You just don't need the perlite. This is the seed starting mix. I just filled a flat. I'm going to be growing annuals outside of my greenhouse, so these are going to be seeded with marigolds actually. Buying the bag stuff, you're going to get maybe 2 flats full. It could cost you easily $8 to $12. This is probably $1.50 in materials to fill this flat. Just want to cut in real quick. This is actually, I'm doing this at the end of the video. That's everything I made today throughout the video. Please subscribe, it really helps me out. I'm trying to reach 750,000 subscribers. And I wanted to stress that I'm just showing you ratios and my recipe, so you don't have to follow this exactly. Just generally speaking, the basic seed starting mix, a potting up mix, 50-50 garden soil mix, and then a container soil or a potting soil for growing in containers. Real easy. Basic principles. So next we're going to make an all-purpose garden soil for filling your raised beds, any kind of raised bed, and it's going to be my 50-50 mix. We're going to be talking about a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 mix after this, and that's kind of a potting up container mix. This is my soil. It's red clay, this is dry. This is what my earth looks like before I amend it, put in compost, take care of it, etc. So you may be in a position where you can use your earth. That's going to save you a lot of money. If not, you're going to have to buy some bagged products. So you can just buy any bagged topsoil. It's usually the cheapest. Unfortunately, a lot of these products contain wood in them. You really don't want that, but you can get by with it for filling your garden beds and stuff like that. We're not going to add any wood to the DIY mixes that I'm making. Wood actually can challenge your plants for nitrogen because this wood still has to decay. Microbes get involved, they try and break it down, and they want nitrogen from the soil. Now this looks pretty good. Again, check out the video that actually shows you what's in these products. I dry them, and this is just really a bunch of wood. As soon as you add water, it looks like, you know, it's pretty good stuff. What we're going to be making, so then you go from topsoil, which is the cheapest to buy in bags, you're going to go to a garden soil, which gets to be more expensive. Usually 2 times is more expensive, and that is usually, this is wet too, but that's usually the addition of just plain old peat moss. You really get to see what's in these once they're dry, so I do recommend checking that video out. So we're going to make the 50-50 garden soil using peat moss, using your earth, or using a bagged topsoil. So now we're making the 50-50 mix. This would be 50% your earth or topsoil, 50% peat moss. Now the peat moss is dry. Some people like to moisten it before they work with it. Try not to breathe in the dust, wear a mask. I like to blend it when it's dry, and then I add water to it. So we're trying to duplicate this. This is the garden soil you buy in the bag. So we're using topsoil as the earth, 50% peat moss. If you want, again, you would just take some lime, sprinkle it over the peat moss, work it in. That will kind of reduce some of the acidity if you're concerned about that. Let's get that out of the way. So we're just going to blend this together. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I make a lot of this, and I just kind of let it sit, and I wait, and then I just, you know, grab handfuls, well, barrelfuls, shovelfuls, and then I might mix some compost into it when I need to. It's just an all-purpose mix. It's just the 50-50 mix. I don't put in the compost and stuff now, or the organic granular fertilizer. I just wait until I see what I'm going to use it for. So this is great for earth beds, for raised beds. If I'm filling a really tall raised bed that's like, I don't know, 36 inches, in the bottom I put wood, branches, old grass, hay, firewood. In the middle I might put something like this. This is nice quality. But when I get to the top third, that's when I add in the compost and the fertilizer. So it's a way to save resources. This is what it looks like dry. It looks nice and loose. We're trying to replicate this, and this is, you know, thick. Look. I mean, it's okay, but I don't want to really pay for that. So let me add some water to this, and we'll see how it transforms over. Let me get rid of this till we're done. So this is the 50-50 mix after it's hydrated. I mean, it looks really nice. A great base, loose. You could add more of your earth to it if you feel like, you know, there's too much peat in it. You can really tweak it however you want. And it's so much cheaper is the bottom line. This is what comes in the bag mix. Squeeze that, it's clumped together. You know, I mean, I guess it's all right. but I can make it for less money and I can make something better. Generally speaking, like I was saying, I don't put any fertilizer in this, don't put any compost in yet. Sometimes I make big batches and it just kind of sits till I need it. And then I add in my compost, fertilizers, or whatever I want to use. But just to give you an idea, I just take some fertilizer and I sprinkle it across the top. So if I have a big mound, I'm just sprinkling the organic granular across. Any organic granular is fine as long as NP and K is represented. Sometimes I think we get a little bit too crazy with the cheese whiz and we try and tweak everything to match the needs of a plant at certain stages, and that's great. I mean, there's science behind it, but remember, a compost, a good compost, is well below a 111 NP and K, and you don't need to add anything else to your garden. You add in the organic matter, you add in the compost, you throw some compost in mid-season. The plants know how to pull stuff out of here. So, you know, a handful sprinkled across of an organic granular, add some stuff into there, but the best thing you can ever use is compost. Here's the 50-50 mix. It's beautiful. I can even pot up into this. You know, I don't really have to go to the next mix that I'm going to show you, but I wanted to show you how to make it from the start. So if you wanted to skip this and, you know, not store it somewhere, and you wanted a nice container mix or a potting up mix, it's going to be 1 part peat, 1 part earth, and then 1 part, almost forgot it, compost. Before I get to that, I'm going to go get a chunk of my clay soil and do the 50-50 mix so you can just see how it transforms. So this is my garden soil. It's clay and there's nothing wrong with it. It's filled with great micronutrients, all kinds of good stuff. You know, you're gonna have to break up obviously your clay soil, but I just want to show you the addition of peat really makes a difference. Now if you're starting a bed and it's like 4 by 8, you're going to take that cubic foot bale, spread it out across there, and you're going to kind of turn it in and work it into the soil. But if you're filling in a different way, I usually make it just like you see here. You know, as you're breaking through here, earlier I found a grub. A lot of people freak out when they see grubs. They're everywhere. You don't need to worry about them. They could be problematic, but worry about it if it becomes a problem. You cannot get grubs out of your soil. So this is my heavy soil. All of my garden was like this when I first started. You don't need to turn this into perfect, beautiful stuff. In fact, you can make this 50-50 garden mix when you go to plant a tomato, dig out a big hole, put in your quality stuff, leave the rest of the garden where plants aren't growing just like this, put compost down. Over time, the worms will incorporate organic matter into here. So you can really, again, save resources by making this 50-50 mix and just using it in the planting hole. I'll be doing a whole video on that. So you kind of just eyeball it. I'm not doing measures like we did earlier. It's like half my earth, half the peat moss, and just mix it together. We're going to add water to this. And again, you could add more peat. Like I probably want to add a little bit more when my soil is a heavy clay or if you have a heavier soil. But this looks pretty good so far. It does take some work, but again, you save so much money. And you don't have to, you know, pulverize it perfectly. Leave the chunks of clay in there. You know, the plants don't care. So mix this through. Now, clay soil is usually higher in pH. It's like close sometimes to a 7 pH. Peat moss is more acidic. I don't add lime because I know in my garden, you know, they kind of balance each other out and they find a happy medium. This is what it ends up looking like once I add the peat moss into there, and plants will do perfectly fine in this. Okay, let me just add some water. So once the water's added, this stuff is pretty heavy. It looks like that bag garden soil. What I would do is add in, you know, a couple shovelfuls of peat moss. It would look something like this when you're done. So I think you get the idea. Like, I'm just giving you kind of general guidelines. This is wonderful for filling earth beds, filling your raised beds. When you squeeze it now, it breaks up. Made from my earth, free, and just peat moss. Nothing fancy in there, nothing expensive. And this is what I use as the base. Now, depending on what I'm doing with it, I would add in some compost, maybe more peat moss. If I want, that might be when I add in some worm castings, if I'm using it in a specialized way. Now this is kind of heavy for a container mix. And container mixes or potting up mix or potting mixes. So you have, let me clarify, a potting up mix is something you take your seedlings to, pot them up into bigger containers. A potting and container mix are for bigger containers, bigger pots, for growing in vertical towers. I'm going to show you how I make that. You want that to be lighter, you want it to hold more water. So this looks pretty good. If I was going to turn this into a basic potting up mix, kind of like what I have over there, I'm just throwing everything I make into that. I would add in some compost, and let me just show you that. It's going to make a great quick potting up mix, nothing too fancy. This is my compost that I'm adding to it. It's not a 50-50 ratio, and I don't want to give you an exact measure here because you have to be a little bit comfortable just sort of eyeballing things. This again is a potting up mix, so it's sort of my 50-50 mix, earth, peat, then I throw in some compost and I just mix it through. This is light enough for smaller containers, for potting up my transplants, letting them grow a little bit longer, and it really saves you money. You can go fancy. I mean, you can use the container and potting mix that I'm going to make next, which is just more peat moss. It's definitely going to grow, you know, wonderful seed starts. But this works just as well. Mix the compost through. Again, if you felt that this was too heavy for potting up your transplants into, you know, a bigger pot, you could add some more peat moss. But I can tell you, just by squeezing this and then it breaks apart. This is just perfect for that. There's so many ways that you can tweak these recipes. Bottom line is you're going to keep saving money. The 50-50 mix really can be used for so many things. I use it as the potting up mix, add in the compost. Just to clarify before we get to the specific container mix, potting mix, a potting up mix, you have your seed starting mix goes in here, and then you're going to pot your plants up into a container like this, maybe that size. This works really well. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's got the earth in there, a little bit heavier than a container mix or a potting mix. You could, you know, use the potting mixes and the container mixes that I'm going to make in a second to pot up, but it's just an extra expense. This works really well. I like having the earth in it. I think it helps the plants. Microbes are in there, so you don't need anything fancy. I just wanted to stress that. So now let's go to really a mix that you want to use in containers. It's going to hold a lot of water. It's perfect for that. The most expensive way to fill your containers, your vertical towers, is to use a potting mix. All these products work, they're just expensive. So a couple things I always want to point out to people, I do this a lot. This product says grow plants twice as big. Nice little asterisk here. Come down here, you read what it says. It says when compared to plants that are not fertilized. So there's nothing special in this that makes plants grow twice as big except for fertilizer. And when we're done, when I'm done showing you how to make the potting mix, the container mix, we'll talk about fertilizing, how to, you know, add fertilizers to these different DIY mixes. This is the basic potting mix. You open it up. It's pretty nice. There's some wood in there. There's peat moss in there, a little perlite, maybe some vermiculite. I don't want to use wood in my DIY recipes. It's just not necessary. You could, you know, you could buy a bag of shredded hardwood if you want to. You could add it into everything that I'm showing you. So the potting mix, the whole goal behind a potting mix is that you want it to be loose and you want it to hold moisture. And we're going to create that using peat moss, using compost. You could just go with peat and compost if you wanted to be honest. I like adding earth in because earth brings in microbes, brings in micronutrients. So I like doing the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. From that, we can always add in more peat moss. If you're in a hotter climate, you think it's your containers are gonna dry out more, just add in some more peat moss. This is the base recipe that I use, and some of you might have recognized that I'm using dry peat. So when I add water to this, it's gonna expand. So the ratio is not perfect. If you want, you know, more of a exact ratio, you know, you want to use moistened peat moss. So by using dry peat moss, I end up technically with more than 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. But it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect because everybody's going to have different types of topsoil. Like I have that heavy clay. I also use some of the bagged topsoil mix because some of you won't be able to use earth, so you're going to use that topsoil. If your earth is heavier, you're just going to want to add in more compost. Some people don't have an endless, more peat moss. Some people don't have an endless supply of compost, and it's hard to get. If you have tons of compost, you can actually probably just grow in that if it's really well broken down. But we all don't have that. So this is the general ratio: 1/3 topsoil or earth, 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss. Mix it all together. Again, I'm using the dry peat moss. When we add water to this, it's going to look even better. I like adding earth to my container mix. Some people don't like to do that. I like adding in the microbes. I like giving places for worms to kind of take hold. There's worm eggs in the earth, or I should say for the worms to establish in the containers. This makes a really nice container mix. Lighter than the 50-50 mix. You could use this for the potting up mix if you want to. We could add in some more peat moss, but I really like this. It's going to hold water. It's completely, fluffy and loose. And again, after this is done, we're going to go over adding the granular fertilizers and different amendments to your container mixes. I want to just take a pause with that. Earth beds are very different. Your plants can grow into the earth, get lots of nutrients. When you're growing in vertical towers or containers, your plants are going to suck the nutrients out of the soil quickly, especially when they're larger. They're going to suck the moisture out of your container. If your container runs out of moisture completely for one day, damages the root systems of the plant, your plants are going to suffer. So you want to make sure you have peat moss to hold water. You want to have compost to hold some water, give nutrients, and I do, again, think you should have some earth in there. Hotter areas, more peat. That's going to make a big difference. I've been using this too for, I don't know, over 10 years. It's a really, really good mix for containers. It's better than anything you can buy in a bag, and it's so much cheaper. All right, let me add the water. We'll take a look at it, and then we'll start talking about adding the granular fertilizer, because fertilizing your container mixes, your potting mixes, are key to have healthy plants, when you're growing in them. Fully hydrated, a great base for a container mix. Now I have the clay soil, remember, so it's a little bit heavier than maybe some of your soils are going to turn out to be, or your potting mixes will turn out to be. I don't mind growing in this. I know that it's effective. Depending on what I'm growing, how big the container is, I might add in some more peat moss. So I'm going to do that just to show you what it looks like when it's lighter. For ratios, if you wanted not to include the earth, you could do 2/3 peat, 1/3 compost. That's a good mix. I usually don't recommend doing like 2/3 compost, 1/3 peat, only because sometimes compost is not fully broken down and it can continue to compost in your container, take nitrogen from your plants. If you know you have the best compost ever, it's fully broken down, fully decayed, then you can use, 2/3 compost. You can probably grow straight in that. Right over here is the Miracle-Gro potting mix. It's lighter because there's no real earth in there, maybe some sand. So let's turn this into something that looks a little bit more like this by adding in a big shovelful of peat moss. And again, tweak this as you wish. I added in the extra peat moss, and I'll say it again, this is just beautiful stuff. I mean, look how nice that looks. Over here is the Miracle-Gro potting mix. Really not that much different. Let's take this into the light. Bring this over into the light, or into the sun. Now, if we want this, or if we want to make something that looks more like this, we're going to come over, grab some perlite, throw it in there, another handful for this size. Now, when I'm done here, we're going to go to fertilizing. I don't like putting a lot of fertilizer in as I'm making big batches, because sometimes I specialize it a little bit, change it up a little bit. So we'll go to a container, and I'll just show you how I add stuff into there. And then maybe, because there's a little vermiculite in there, we'll put in some vermiculite, another handful, and this much of vermiculite and perlite is pennies, especially if you're buying it in bulk or in quantity. And you may want to buy this, you know, if you're making lots of seed starting mix, you know, a huge bag of vermiculite, it's going to save you a lot of money. We would just mix this through, and now, let's get that out of the way. You can see the bits of vermiculite in there. I guess that's perlite. And now look how nice this looks. Let's get a good picture in there. Sometimes the sun messes up everything. Let's come over here. That's what we just made. This is what we paid a lot of money for. And they both look pretty similar. In fact, this looks much better. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. So this is the container mix, the potting up mix. Please subscribe. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to reach 750 subscribers, so every person counts. Greatly appreciated. So let's get to filling up a container and some basic principles on fertilizing. This is a 4 or 5 gallon fabric pot. I saw these at my seed shop. Perfect for growing 1 pepper plant easily, maybe 2. So that's what we're going to plant today. Could use the container mix that we obviously just made. And again, I mean, just look how wonderful it is. So with the container this small, I'm going to fill it to the top, put in 1 handful of the organic granular. But let's just say this was maybe 10, 15 gallons or something like that. When it's bigger, I like to go and fill it about halfway. And then I add in amendments at that point. Pretending that this is a bigger container, we're at that halfway mark, I put in my first round of basic organic granular fertilizer. And you can use anything. They're all basically the same ingredient. In a pot this size, I would actually just use 1 handful, but let's just pretend this is 10, 15 gallons. I would put a whole handful right into the bottom, and then I would just mix it through. It's just easier to just kind of blend the ingredients that way when you're in bigger containers. If I'm getting up to maybe a 20 gallon, 30 gallon container, it's going to be 2 or 3 handfuls of the organic granular fertilizer. If you want to use worm castings, same thing. I would put in a handful or 2 of worm castings, mix it in, and then we're going to fill it the rest of the way. For a container about this size, 1 handful of any organic granular, 1 or 2 handfuls of worm castings. That's going to really set it up nicely. If you're worried about the acidity from the peat moss, or you're growing a plant that doesn't like acidity, any garden lime is fine. Sprinkle it in and kind of mix it through. All right, let me fill this up to the top. We'll finish it up. You really don't have to over worry about the numbers for N, P, and K. Remember, the organic granular fertilizers are all pretty much the same. They have N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium represented. Compost itself is well below a 111 N, P, and K, and plants do just fine. So let's pretend we just filled this 4 or 5 gallon container, and I just want to show you again how much I put in there. 1 big handful of the organic granular. Let me get this out of the way. And I would mix it all the way down. You know, because this container is smaller, I can just get down to the bottom, mix it through. I would throw in some lime. I don't want to put any more in there. Mix it through. The worm castings, mix it through. This is set up for growing now. Going to open up the center. Going to pop out my red bell pepper. And we're going to just drop it right into the middle. I want it to be a little bit deeper. There we go. Backfill. A little hard to do one-handed. And this is set up and good to go. So let's talk about the water-soluble fertilizer, and then we're done. Any water-soluble fertilizer is going to work. I used to use fish emulsion, Alaska brand 511, but now that I have a dog and I bring her in the garden, every time I water with fish emulsion, she eats the soil. So now I work with AgroThrive. I highly recommend that for an organic granular, or I'm sorry, for an organic water-soluble fertilizer. It's really, really good stuff. I mean, you can't beat it. The nicest looking potting mix out there. And then I just want to show you how much I give them. When you mix it, you're going to mix it into a gallon. You're just going to give it a drink about that much. Just get in N, P, and K in a water-soluble form so that the plant can use it right away. The organic granular fertilizer is going to slowly break down with time. For that to happen, you need microbes. So that's why I like throwing the earth in there, because when you throw in earth, you're throwing in microbes. Thanks so much for watching. I hope these DIY recipes help you save some money, have some fun with it. Go ahead and tweak them as you wish. And again, please subscribe. I'll teach you how to grow food, have some fun. And if you're looking for seeds, starting supplies, fabric pots, neem oil, peppermint oil, please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com. Thanks for watching.